Good morning to each of you. Greetings in the name of Jesus Christ. It is good to be able to share again this morning. It feels like I barely preached this summer. I think with the ordinations and everything else that was happening, the schedule got a little messed up. So I don't think I've preached since like the end of June or something like that. So it feels like it's been a little bit of a break. I'd just like to say thank you again to all of you as a congregation for your support for our family over the last year. In about 16 days, it's going to be 1 year since Dietrich passed on into eternity, and it has been quite a journey for our family, and I would like to say thank you again to you as a congregation for your tremendous support and love for us over the last year. This morning when we were talking about faith in Sunday school, I was looking at the definition that the Sunday school commentary had on faith, and it said something about belief even when there isn't reasonable logic or something like that. And I thought that was a really good definition of what faith is, because you can't really explain how you get through things in life that are difficult except through the power of God. And when somebody asks you how you made it through, you kind of look back and you say, well, I can't really even explain to you how it happened, but it did. And it's because of the goodness and the faithfulness of God and the support of Christian sisters and brothers who love the Lord as well. So thank you. In light of that, one of the things that I have spent a considerable amount of time thinking about over the course of the last year is what lies ahead for us as Christians, and what are we anticipating and longing for? This morning in the Sunday school lesson, there was some verses listed from Hebrews 10, and it talked about the faith of those who suffered persecution because of their faith in God, and how they were able to go through that because of their faith in Him. But in the verses that lead up to that, it talks about others who lived their lives as pilgrims, and it said how they left their country and desired a heavenly country. One that it says, a heavenly, wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He hath prepared for them a city. And this morning, I would like us to go to the book of Revelation, and we're going to look at this heavenly city that awaits us after the end of time, when God says enough and sends Jesus Christ back to redeem the world. And I would like to look at the new heaven and the new earth. I've simply titled this message Heaven, and there are a lot of opinions about what happens after a person dies and where they go. And this morning I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to walk us through that or to decipher what's going to happen. For myself personally, I believe that there is a place of abode for those who have died, and there is a new heaven and a new earth that are prepared that nobody has yet seen. Jesus told the thief on the cross that today you will be with me in paradise. So obviously there is a place where those who have died go until the day of resurrection, when each of us are resurrected back to life. But here in Revelation, John is talking about this new heaven and new earth, and he's trying to explain to us what he is seeing. And there are people who have had near-death experiences, who have seen things that they've come back and said, this is what I saw. And there's a lot of books out there, if you've ever taken the time to research some of this, there's a lot of books out there on this very topic. In recent years, there have been a number on younger children who have had near-death experiences, and they came back and they said what they saw. And I'm not going to stand up here this morning and say that this person is right and this person is wrong. Some of them, the people have actually admitted that they made it up. But these are books that are bestsellers. If you look on the New York Times best-selling list, when some of these books are released, they spend a considerable amount of time in the top 25 books. And the only thing that I can explain from that is there is a lot of curiosity about what lies beyond this life. Because when you talk to people, even a person who declares themselves to be a hardcore atheist, I believe that there is something within them that tells them that there is more to this world than just what we can see with our own physical eyes. And there is a life that lies beyond what we see right here. And we know that, and we claim that. We believe that in faith, that there is something that is much greater than this. But I think that there's a lot of people who are very, very curious about it. And I think that that's something that is good. When we look at the book of Revelation here and what John is talking about in terms of the New Jerusalem and the new city and the new earth, we are given a little bit of information, just a tiny bit. But what he gives us should really make us excited about what lies in front of us. And that should make us desirous of what is coming and just give us this desire to understand it as much as we can and give us a desire to actually go there and spend eternity with Christ. After Dietrich died, I spent a couple of weeks outside of school, and then I went back to teaching. And as most of you know, the majority of the classes that I teach are Bible class. And so Bible class can tend to veer from the topic at hand and go on to other topics when people bring things up. But one of the questions that the students asked me a lot after I came back to school was what I thought about the afterlife. And we'd spent a considerable amount of time talking about this and ideas of what it could be. And one of my students admitted that before we actually talked about it, they weren't really even that excited about going to heaven. Because they said, well, when we talk about it, it sounds like all we're going to do is we're going to walk through these streets of gold and we're going to worship and all this other stuff. And it doesn't really sound that enticing. And I said, well, I think that what we're reading about here in the book of Revelation is only a small picture of what we're actually going to be doing in heaven. John is giving us a description of the new Jerusalem, the city. But it clearly says that this new city sits on the new earth, and there's a lot of things that are going to, I believe, are going to happen outside of the city that we have no idea what it all entails. So this morning, I just want us to think about what lies ahead and the excitement of our heavenly home. Let's go to Revelation chapter 21, and I'm just going to read the entire chapter because it all deals with the new heaven and the new earth. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. And he that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said unto me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said unto me, It is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and the murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. And there came unto me one of the seven angels which had the seven vials full of the seven last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, I show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and her light was like a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal, and had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof. And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. And he measured the wall thereof, 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of one angel. And the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. And the foundations of the city of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third a chalcedony, the fourth an emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth a topaz, the 10th a chrysoprasus, the 11th a jacinth, the 12th an amethyst. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate was of one pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, as it was transparent glass. And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it, and there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. If you don't read that passage and look at these verses and look at John's description and long for what John is writing about, I don't even know what to say. Because when we look at our world that we live in, and we look at how John describes this city, it's mind-blowing. It completely blows away anything that we can even begin to imagine. I don't know what the most beautiful thing is that you've ever seen in your life, whether it was natural or something that man made, but it just pales in comparison to what John is describing here. Beauty beyond anything that we have ever even begun to imagine. Now, when we look at this city, John is giving us a description. He's giving us enough details that I believe it's just like small pieces of it just to feed us and to give us a desire to actually be there and to go there. We don't have all the details, and we don't need all the details. But when we look at this city, John is describing it. He's saying in these first couple of verses, he's saying how he sees this city coming down adorned as a bride for her husband. So he sees this city in all of its radiance and all of its glory descending down out of heaven, adorned as a bride. And when we look at these words that John is using, and we look at what the city is a depiction of, and we see what's written in the foundations, the city is something that is figurative today, but is going to take on a literal sense here when it is actually brought down out of heaven. It's a depiction of us as the church, adorned as a bride, and it's actually taking on a physical property. And here, it is actually given to us, and we can actually see it instead of just having language. Peter talks about us as living stones. We're part of the church. And this foundations of the city are the 12 apostles. In other words, it's a picture of the church, and it's coming down out of heaven prepared for us who have made our calling and election sure through Jesus Christ. But here in the first verse, John is saying, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. What happens to the old heaven and the old earth? 2 Peter describes what happens to them. They're burned up. 2 Peter says how they're burned up with a fervent heat. All of those things are destroyed. Now, how is that going to happen? There's a lot of speculation on what it could be. Some people say that it could be volcanic activity, where the earth is going to be destroyed through volcanic activity. It could be fire out of heaven. Again, I don't know. But there are different things that could happen, but we know that it's all going to be burned up, and God is going to give us something completely new. It says that it's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. The world that we're living in today, every piece and every part of it has been affected by the fall of man. It has been affected by sin. and this fire is going to burn it, and in a sense, it's going to purify it in preparation for this new heaven and this new earth. The last phrase of verse 1 kind of gets me. It says that there is no more sea. I'm the kind of person that I enjoy the ocean. You know, when you're standing on a beach somewhere and there's waves just pouring in, they're crashing in onto the shore, I enjoy standing there and seeing that. It's beautiful. If you stand on the edge of the ocean and you watch the sunset, there's hardly anything that beats that. It's amazing. So when I look at this verse and it says that there's no more sea, what is it talking about? Is there going to be there's going to be no ocean in heaven? We know that in times past, and even for some people today, the ocean is something to be feared. In times past, when they went out and they sailed over the ocean, they didn't really know exactly where they were going to go. They didn't know what kind of countries they were going to encounter. They had all kinds of ideas of what the ocean contained. Today, we don't fear the ocean quite as much, but the ocean is expansive. It's huge. So, in one sense, it seems like a shame to get rid of the ocean. But it doesn't say that there isn't going to be water. Because we know that in the next chapter, in chapter 22, John talks about a river. In the book of Ezekiel, it talks about a river that flows out of the temple. It says how it starts as a small stream and it gets bigger and bigger. For those of you who enjoy outdoor things, it says that there's fish and there's fishermen who are catching the fish. And it says that it gets deeper and deeper, and there's all kinds of things in it. And it says how, in Ezekiel, it says there's trees growing on each side of the bank, and it's the fruit of those trees is for the healing of the nations. And in chapter 22, it talks about, in Revelation, it talks about that as well. But there's plenty of water in heaven. And I don't believe that if God is going to get rid of the ocean, that he's not going to give us something that's even better than what's here on this earth. And that's one thing that I want to stress. When we think about the new heaven and the new earth, a lot of times when we think about heaven, we try to think about it in our earthly terms, and we say, well, I really, really hope that there's this in heaven. And we list whatever it is. When I talked with my students, they talked about the things that they really hope that are there, and I said, well, I have no idea if they're actually going to be there. I don't know if there's going to be snow in heaven. I don't know if there's going to be seasons in heaven. It does describe, when it talks about the fruit, it says how it gives their fruit in their season. So I'm not sure how all of that looks like, or what it all looks like. But the thing that I want to stress this morning is it doesn't matter what God replaces it with. It's going to be a whole lot better than what we have right here. A whole lot better. So if God decides to take away the ocean and give us something else, I'm completely fine with that. But it says that there is no more sea. And then it says how John saw this new city being descending out of heaven. And the most exciting thing that I see in verse 3 is the thing that I find the most exciting about this new heaven and the new earth. Because it says that the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them. This morning, you and I are gathered here together to worship a God that we have never seen. We have no idea what God looks like. But there is coming a time where God is going to dwell with us, and we're going to be his people. And it says there that God himself shall be with them and be their God. The children of Israel had a picture of the presence of God when God came and dwelt in the tabernacle. But God is no longer here on this earth. He's here in his spirit, but we're going to be in the very presence of God himself. And when we look at this new heaven and new earth, that, I believe, is one of the most exciting things about it. God himself is going to be with us. And it says in verse 4 how God is going to wipe away all tears from their eyes. It's difficult for us to imagine a world where all pain and suffering and sorrow and crying is completely eradicated because it's so ingrained in who we are. This morning in our Sunday school lesson, when we were talking about faith, we were talking about how it takes so much faith to really trust God in the hard times in our lives, those difficult times. In this new heaven and new earth, all of those things are going to be wiped away. There's going to be no more pain. There's going to be no more suffering. All those things are going to be passed away. And I don't know if they're going to be completely wiped out of our memory or if they're going to still be there as reminders of what it was like before. But I do know that there isn't going to be any pain related to any of these things. There's going to be no more death, no more suffering, no more sorrow, no more crying, because in verse 5, he says, I am making all things new. All things are completely different. And when we look at this idea of things being made new, all of us enjoy something that is new for us. We all enjoy those new things. But the truth is that the newness eventually wears off because it starts to break down, it starts to wear out or whatever. But I believe that in heaven and on this new earth, the newness is something that is never going to go away. There's never going to be a time in heaven where we're going to look around and say, I've seen all this before, or this just doesn't seem the same to me as what it did before. It's going to be a newness that I believe never is going to wear out. In verse 6, it says that he's speaking to the one that's sitting upon the throne, the one who says, I am making all things new. And he says, and he turns to John and he says, it is done. And he says, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. In other words, God is reminding John of the fact that he is the one who determined the beginning of the world. God is the one who determined the beginning of the things as we know them. And God is the one who determines the end of things as we know them. He is the beginning and he is the end. And then he says in verse 6 that he is the one who will give unto him that is the thirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. In other words, Christ is the one who is offering us water. He is the one who is offering us this opportunity to be able to inherit this new heaven and this new earth. And in verse 8, he is giving a reminder to any person who does not want to make themselves pure, any person who does not want to make themselves right with God, these people have their reward as well. Or they have their punishment. They are given a punishment, and it says, in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, and it's the second death. When we talk about the first death, we're talking about physical death. The second death is when a person is eternally separated from God's presence. But when we look at this city, John goes on and he says that he starts talking to this angel, and it's in verse 11. He begins describing this city, and he's talking about the glory of the city. When we look at it, we look at the beauty of this city, and we look at what Jesus is saying in verse 8. It's a reminder that any person who does not want to accept Christ, does not want to drink of the water that Christ has to offer them, they have their reward, but there is something else that is available to each of us. And then it says in verse 11, how the glory of God is like a stone most precious. Her light was like this jasper stone, which is clear as crystal. And John is attempting to describe this city, which is just radiating the glory of God. When we look at in the Old Testament, there were different times where God's presence was close to the children of Israel. And he gave them very strict instructions on how they were to approach him in those moments. And the reason is because God, in his glory, cannot be looked upon by us as human beings in the state that we currently find ourselves in. Because of our sinfulness and our brokenness, we can't look upon God in his true radiance and his true glory. And John here is talking about the glory of God shining out in its purity and in its radiance, and he's talking about it being as a jasper stone. Now, all of these different jewels and emeralds and everything else that John talks about, I don't have a lot of experience with. I can look them up, I can research them, and I can see pictures of them, but they are not things that I've actually ever seen in real life. But if you look up a jasper stone, jasper stones come in many different colors. They can actually be any color. Some of them are multicolored, but they're very, very precious stones. And if you stop and think about a stone that is clear as crystal, that is multicolored, when light shines through it, what happens to it? I've taken little prisms and shown light through them, and you're able to see all the different colors that light makes up. But I believe what John is saying here, when he's talking about this light that was like unto a jasper stone, even as crystal, he's talking about a light that's just full of color and radiance that we can't even hardly begin to understand. And so John is trying to put it into words so we can maybe imagine it. But when John sees the radiance of God in all of its glory, it's a light that is pure and it's glorious. It's beautiful. And John is talking about this light shining out clear as crystal. And then he goes on and he begins to describe this city. And he talks about this wall that was great and high and how it had 12 gates. And it's 4 square, so on each side of the city, there are 3 gates. And he says that the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in the name of them were the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And then the angel gives John this reed to measure the city. And the size of the city is something that is difficult for me to even imagine. Because if you take these measurements and you try to put them into our modern day terms, from what I understand, the city is approximately 1,500 miles cubic. It's as wide as it is long, and that's how high it is. And John goes on and he talks about what this city looks like. And he says how it's this tall, and he says the building of the wall was of jasper, and the city was pure gold like unto clear glass. How do you describe something that's made of pure gold that looks like glass? How do you even begin to elaborate on it? John is talking about something that completely blows our minds, not just the size of it, but its construction. It's made of gold, pure as glass. And to think about this city being pure as glass and the glory of God just radiating through it just thrills my soul. It thrills me to think of a city that actually is going to be prepared for you and me to actually inhabit that looks like this. And then he goes on and he describes the foundations of the city. And as I was studying for this, the thing that struck me is if you would take any building, any beautiful building that you have ever seen, probably the last thing that you would describe to me would be the foundation. Because the foundation isn't something that is made to look very beautiful. Now, some buildings, you can see parts of the foundation, so they make them look nice. But you would never take precious jewels and use them as the foundation of any building here in this world. But God is taking all of these different things, all of these precious stones, and he's using them for his foundation to build this city. And it says how there is the name of the apostles is in each of them. And then he goes on, he says in verse 21, how I said that there was 12 gates, how there's 3 on each side. And he says every several gate, or each individual gate, was of 1 pearl. Now, I tried to research what the largest pearl is currently in the world, And there was a couple of different things that I found. But from what I found currently, the world's largest pearl is owned by a Canadian man who it was given to his aunt by another man a number of years ago, and he inherited it from her. It's about the size of a baby, and it weighs about 60 pounds. How much do you think it's worth? Well, there's a lot of discrepancy on how much it's worth because it's so rare. It's insured at $200 million, and it's valued at about 60 to 90 million for a little tiny pearl. Now, if I'm an architect and I'm designing a city that is 1,500 miles high, I'm thinking the gates are pretty massive. And each gate is an individual pearl. Huge. When I look at this city, I'm amazed that John even attempted to describe it. Because in a lot of ways, I think John was stunned by what he saw. But he's giving us enough of information that when we see this city, it's going to be beyond anything that we have ever imagined. We can sit here this morning, and you can stop and you can imagine, I have a picture in my mind kind of what it looks like, but it's going to be even so much better than that. Way better than anything that I can possibly even imagine. John goes on and he describes in verse 22, he says there's no temple because God himself is dwelling among us. There is no need for us to go to the temple to worship. But the amazing thing is, in verse 23, is it says the city has no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God does lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. A city that has no light to us is hard to picture because we're so caught up in what we know here in this world, and we try to imagine it with our physical properties that we are capable of imagining. But the city doesn't have any need of the sun. There is no need of the moon because the glory of God is just radiating throughout the whole. This whole entire city is just radiating the glory of God. When I think of this city, and I think of the height of it, and I think of how John describes this pure city, and I'm imagining a city where the light just goes the whole way through it, the thing that is hard for me to understand is there levels in heaven? Like, if it's 1,500 miles high, is there stories? And if there's stories, if I'm at the top, can I look the whole way down through it and see all these people, thousands of miles below me or hundreds of miles down below me walking throughout the city? Is that how it's going to look? I don't know. I don't have answers. But I think the thing that we see with this depiction of heaven is, again, this feeding of information to stir within us a desire and a curiosity for what is yet to come. Because then it goes on, and it says in verse 24 and 25, it says how the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it. We're going to walk within the light of the city. And it says the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And verse 25, it says, the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. So obviously, when we look at these verses and we try to understand what all this activity is talking about, when we look at the new heaven and the new earth, John is describing the city, and there's activity outside of the city that we don't know anything about. What does it mean by the kings of the earth? Are there going to be kingdoms in the new heaven and in the new earth? Are there going to be kingdoms that people are going to rule over? Evidently, there is some type of monarchy or some type of governmental structure to this, because it says very clearly that these kings are going to bring their glory and honor into the city. So there's things that are happening outside of the city that we're not aware of. But the gates of the city will never be shut because there is no night there. And there is no need for the gates to be shut for security because all of those things are passed away. So when we look at this huge city, we look at the walls and their massive construction. None of it is for the security of the people who are within it. None of it is for protection because there isn't any need for that because all of those things, anything that would threaten us, are done away with and they are gone forever. One of the things that I thought of as I was studying for this sermon and I was looking at these verses and the idea of the kings of the earth bringing their glory and honor into it, there are verses in Scripture that describe us as reigning with Christ. Could it be that each of us is going to reign with Christ and each of us, in a sense, is going to be part of this kingship? I don't know. But we do know that they will bring their glory and honor into the city, and it's going to be part of that reality. As John closes this chapter, and we look at the ending of it and what John says, he again reminds us that there is nothing that is going to enter into that city that is going to defile it. There is no person who does not have their name written in the Lamb's Book of Life that is going to be given access to this city. And as I was looking at this chapter, I believe John stresses this point because he's trying to drive home this idea that you and I are given an opportunity to come before the one who is called Alpha and Omega. We are given an opportunity to drink freely from the water that is given to us. So one day we can experience heaven. We can experience this new reality, this amazing city that is beyond anything that we can possibly even imagine in our minds. We are given an opportunity. But he's reminding us again that there is no person who works an abomination or makes a lie that will enter into that city. That city is going to be perfection. It's going to be purity. If there was one word that I would use to describe the city, it would be purity. The city is 100% pure. It is clean. And that is going to be one of the characteristics of people who enter into it. In chapter 22, John opens this chapter by describing this river of water that proceeds out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. And he says how it flows out. And he says that on either side of the river there's the tree of life, which it says it bears 12 manner of fruits and yields her fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And it goes on and it talks about how there are going to be people there and what they're going to be doing. And then in verse 7, Jesus is speaking, and he says, "Behold, I come quickly. Blessed is he that keepeth the sayings of the prophecy of this book." And then it goes on and it talks about John falling down before the angel. And then Jesus says again in verse 12, "Behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me to give every man according to his work shall be. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last." And then in verse 20, Jesus says again, "Surely I come quickly." When we look at this new heaven and new earth, the ending of the book of Revelation is a reminder again that what we are living in is temporal. We are not living for just this world. You and I are living for something that lies way beyond it, something that cannot be taken from us, something that cannot be torn from us, pulled from us, ripped from us. It cannot be taken. It is ours. And John is reminding us, through the words of Jesus Christ himself, that he is returning quickly. He is coming back soon. And if you and I want to have a part in this city that is difficult for us to to understand if you and I want to be part of it, we have an opportunity now. But the end is going to come quickly. And those who do not have their name written in the book of life will not get to enter into this beautiful city. And I've often wondered, when a person who has rejected Jesus Christ, when all of this actually comes to pass, will they be able to get a glimpse of what they could have had, but didn't make that choice to actually pursue? Because if that is the case, it's going to be the most heartbreaking thing for any person to have to go through. To be able to see the glory of this new heaven and this new earth, the glory of it and what could have been, but by their choice, they chose not to go after it. And this morning, I want each of us, every person here, I want each person to be able to walk in the light of that glorious city. What we're doing here this morning collectively is worshiping a God who has promised us many, many things. He has promised us that he's going to give this to us. And we're here collectively this morning. But it's going to be so much better to be in heaven collectively, as a group right like this, worshiping around the throne of God. But today, you have your opportunity. You have your chance to make sure that you are going to be part of it. And this morning, I challenge you, if you haven't, please make preparation. What lies before us is something that is well worth it. There isn't anything that you want to trade for what lies before us. Make the right choice to drink freely from the fountain that flows from the throne of God. Let's kneel.